Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sly Fox Sports podcast. I'm Aeron and Alex. There's no Jeremy Miller. Jeremy Miller is currently on hiatus due to personal difficulties. We wish him well. That means that the reins are solely at my discretion. We're going to talk NBA. It's time for a preview of the 2020-2021 season. And of course, I can't talk about NBA without bringing in an expert. The man in the dark, it would seem. He's hiding in the shadows, but ultimately he knows his lane. He knows his basketball. He is the king of Asperger's style, and he is the master of the five-finger York Hall discount. He is, of course, Alex DeLanzo, the roaming reporter of Sunday football, and also a very knowledgeable man in the know-how of basketball. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. Pleasure to be here. Also, I'm known for having a good chest pass.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
We'll keep that one. That's going to have to go in. You're getting quite the resume here, mate. I have to mark these down. So, yeah. NBA, obviously, we're both big basketball fans. You tend to roam a little bit more of a neutral. I am obviously rolling deep with the Miami Heat. Obviously, last season, my Miami Heat were, shall we say, done pretty savagely in the finals by the LA Lakers. And of course, we are back to it pretty quickly. The season kicks off in just a matter of days, actually. Yeah. And of course, you can't really go any further when it comes to predictions than the LA Lakers, of course, with the two-headed dragon that is LeBron and Anthony Davis. But this podcast is solely so you guys can get a little bit of a feel for the NBA. We're going to try and cover it weekly if possible. Obviously, whenever Alex has got the time, he's going to be joining me, so I expect to see his gorgeous face a little bit more, and my ugly mug too. What do you think about this upcoming season, mate? What are your feelings about it? Because you've always got good thoughts. You've always got good predictions. What's really jumping at you right now?
To be honest, I actually think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. I think people feel like the Lakers are clear favourites. And they've made very good moves in the off-season. Obviously, bringing in Marc Gasol, they brought in Wesley Matthews, Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell. But I feel like teams like the Milwaukee Bucks, the Clippers have made slightly very good moves as well. A lot of teams have actually retooled and reshaped their rosters very nicely after the COVID pandemic with the bubble. And for me, I think this season could be very interesting, especially when you have no crowds for probably the foreseeable future. So some teams might struggle with the lack of crowds. Some teams might thrive off it, But I feel like it's going to be a very interesting season. Obviously, the Lakers start as favourites, but I wouldn't put them in the bracket of clear favourites, even though, for me, they have the best roster on paper.
Yeah, for me, the Lakers are clear favourites, but that's just because of what I watched them do to my team in the finals. To be honest, Miami Heat getting to the finals was, although I called it at the beginning of the season, much more gusto and arrogance than it was actual legitimate predictions. There was obviously a great discrepancy. What I find interesting about the Lakers is they've loaded, obviously bringing in Gasol, more height, more aggression. They tower over a lot of teams they play, and a lot of teams have a real hard time going toe-to-toe with them because of that physicality, because of that size. We're seeing, actually, despite the fact that this league really thrives off of three-point contention and three-point shooting, I believe that height is still crucial to the success when it comes to the playoffs. If you look at the teams that have height, obviously Milwaukee has Giannis, you got LeBron, you've got Anthony Davis, who is a legitimate beast. Even like the sort of re-emerging Brooklyn Nets, who should be looking very tasty this year, particularly with Kevin Durant as well. Obviously, that's, we're looking at genuine 6'10" to 7-foot guys there. I think that height is actually massively underappreciated. And again, with the draft as well, people didn't go for height. They went for shooting prospects, for free shooters, for point guards, guys of that nature. Who do you think is going to sneak in that we're not expecting? Because obviously nobody had Miami making the finals last year except for myself, because I was being a bellend. But ultimately, there are some teams floating around. We saw what the Nuggets could do last season. They really provided a bit of damage. The Clippers kind of failed where we expected them to come through. I think everybody had, an all LA Western Conference final that didn't materialize the way we wanted it to. Who's looking most likely to break through, who didn't break through last year?
For me, I don't really have a clear kind of breakthrough for maybe a final spot, but I see a team like the Atlanta Hawks making a big jump to maybe a 4 or 5 seed. I feel like they're maybe a bit of defensive consistency away from being a real threat in the East. I mean, they've retooled, they've added Bogdanovic, a Gallinari, they've added experience in Rondo, they've added Chris Dunn, who's a very good defender. They've added Oneka Okongwu as a rookie who will bring energy and intensity to the team. And I feel like also John Collins coming back. He obviously missed the start of the season with a suspension, and I feel like he and Trae Young work very well together. The thing with the Atlanta Hawks, which everyone can see, is they are possibly one of the worst defensive teams I've ever seen. And until that gets sorted out, you can shoot 3-pointers all you want. But if you're giving up 120, 130 points a night and you're not shooting the ball at 60% or 65%, you're not going to win games. And I feel like them bringing in a Rondo, them bringing in Chris Dunn, them bringing in other players to kind of help the younger players, which they need, because I feel like they need to find their identity defensively to actually make that next step for them. And I feel like they could be a team which kind of can cause a few problems. They did last season. They beat the Sixers. I'm pretty sure they beat the Heat. I'm pretty sure they might have beaten the Rockets as well. They cause a lot of problems for some teams, but then other nights they get blown out by 30. And that's just the nature of the beast in the NBA. You've got to be on it every night, and then you've got to be on it in the playoffs. If you're not getting to the playoffs, it doesn't matter if you're putting up 30 and 8 or whatever like Trae Young does. It doesn't matter to me. You know, at the end of the day, the people getting accolades are the ones that are doing it night in, night out.
Yeah, the idea of these stat padding players as well. You know, we've seen that with guys like John Wall for Washington. You know, it's all very well and good going off with numbers and that, but when there isn't a collective team effort, when there isn't that collective defensive effort, that's where the Hawks have struggled, actually. I think Rajon Rondo is a great pickup for them. I actually think that he was very crucial. His intensity coming down the back end of last season, particularly in the Western Conference Finals and the NBA Finals as well. You know, he's still got a lot to offer. He's still got a lot of gas in the tank. And people assume that, Rondo's been around the block and he had his time with the Celtics. And since then, he's kind of just a journeyman. But he was very important. He's a seasoned veteran. You know, he understands what it takes, a team ethos. And when you go into a place like the Hawks, who, like you say, have got all those great moving parts, but don't necessarily have an identity on defense, this is a guy who can all of a sudden bring some stability there. And if he can bring that in, I expect the Hawks to actually push to be, you've got them down as 4 to 5. I could see them being top 3. I really could see them causing a lot of hassle. As much as it canes me to say it a little bit, I do expect a bit of regression for the Miami Heat, because they did massively overcompete last season. I don't think our off season has been particularly fantastic in terms of trades, bringing people in. Overall, the East is where you expect a little bit more of a surprise, a little bit more of a competitive nature, in the sense of, like, the West is so stacked in terms of talent that you always would take a Western opponent over an Eastern opponent, give or take. There is this argument floating around that if you're a 7 or 8 seed, for instance, in the East, you wouldn't even be getting into the playoffs if you were in the West. You'd have to be, you could argue that a lot of the lower end of the seedings in the West could make their way to the upper echelons of the Eastern seedings. That's the quality disparity. Brooklyn, of course, have the opportunity to turn that around. It looks like it's going to be a big show in New York again. Obviously, the Knicks still suck ass, so we expect the Knicks to still be right down the bottom, baby. They are just the perennial losers, so no point. There's your strong prediction. Surprise, the Knicks don't do well this season. What a dumpster fire. But on the flip side of things, obviously with Brooklyn coming through, you get Kevin Durant back fully fit. We're seeing in preseason this naughty little show that him and Kyrie Irving are going to put on. Who do you fancy coming out of the East?
For me, I do fancy the Nets. I fancy them. I feel like they've even got better this season. Even with Kevin Durant coming back, I think the addition of Landry Shamet, very good on-ball defender. They brought in Bruce Brown as well from the Pistons. I think he's a very good defender as well. Obviously, you're going to have Karis LeVert. You're going to have Jared Allen. You're going to have Joe Harris as re-signed as well. He's a very good shooter, very underrated player. And Spencer Dinwiddie coming off the bench. That's the depth that they are playing with at the moment. They're going to have Spencer Dinwiddie coming off the bench. They've got a fantastic roster, and I can see if Kevin Durant can stay healthy, which is a big if. We don't know the rigors of a regular season compared to a pre-season for Kevin Durant. He's obviously been out for a year. So it'd be very interesting to see how him and Kyrie gel. Can they overcome adversity in the regular season, in the playoffs? And that will go a long way to see if they can overcome some of the very good teams in the East, because there are very good opponents. I'd look at the Celtics. I'd look at the Bucks. The Heat are still there. I mean, the Raptors are regressing a bit, but they're still very much a problem for teams, on their night. And then you've got other teams that, will give you a game. And the East, although not as strong as the West, still has a lot of very good, very tough teams.
Yeah, I like the look of Heat as a team. I think, obviously, I pay most attention to Miami Heat. I like the look of our team as an overall unit. Our biggest problem is going to be physicality and aggression down the back end. Are we going to be able to match people for height? A lot of that lies on Bam Adebayo and how well he can mix it up in the paint, because he's not a legitimate center, so to speak. He's more of a power forward that can play center. Anthony Davis pretty much bullied him, let's be honest. Miami did incredibly well, actually, to get 2 wins in the back end of that. So like I spoke to you, didn't I, frequently on WhatsApp and things. I honestly thought we were going to get blown out. It was going to be a sweep. And, that second win was basically everything we had left to try and be competitive. But it showed the disparity for me between the West and the East. Look at Denver as well, who played so well against the Lakers, but only got 1 game off of them in the Western Conference Finals, which speaks volumes about how lethal the Lakers are. I do think that Rajon Rondo will be a slight loss for the Lakers if we're looking at the West. But you mentioned the Raptors, obviously, in the East as well. I don't think the lack of fans has affected too many franchises, but if there is one team that might be affected by a lack of fans, it is the Toronto Raptors, because they are the North. They have this kind of mentality of, we're Canada's only NBA team. They kind of like the idea of being these underdogs, like the idea of being the only representation from their country, and we've seen other teams like the Blue Jays, for instance, in the MLB. They've really thrived off of that in the past when they've tried to make a push for playoffs and things of that nature. And the North, obviously, being champions a few years back, only 2 years removed at this point, I believe, there is still that kind of expectation that they can mix it up. And they do, even like you say, even though they're regressing, obviously losing their biggest star, Kawhi Leonard, who's now kind of made his home in, Los Angeles. It does feel like if anyone could really benefit from a fan base more than anyone else, it would be the Raptors. So I'm curious to see how they're going to react, not having as much of a fan. We are apparently going to have a small number of fans. I believe the Pelicans are going to trial fans. I don't know how many other teams are going to pick up on this. Obviously, over here with COVID-19, the way it is, there's, depending on tier systems at our football games or soccer, as our American friends will like to call it, they obviously will know that there's a small amount of fans, being brought in socially distant, but it's not really making a huge effect on atmospheres, to be honest. I don't think it's enough to really sway a result or make things difficult for teams. Obviously, it's very early doors. Season hasn't started yet. It'd be nice to start breaking the games down when they start with you. As a final aside, if I had to push you right now, who do you see in the finals?
For me, the Lakers against the Nets.
Lakers and the Nets. I think it's that big all-star clash. Durant and Kyrie. Obviously, Kyrie coming back. Obviously, what do you make of Kyrie Irving kind of taking it? He was on Kevin Durant's podcast, wasn't he, recently? And he made a little bit of a cheap shot. He made a suggestion that LeBron's culture was almost cancerous, actually, in some ways. Do you think there's going to be enough drive there? There's going to be enough bad blood? Or do you think LeBron's going to kind of take it out on his hide when he gets the opportunity?
I feel like for me, you don't need to give LeBron James any ammunition. He's already one of the greatest players of all time, and you can't stoke the fire with LeBron. LeBron's work ethic is phenomenal. People go, "Oh, he's 30, whatever." He's 30, whatever, but he works his socks off, and he works his socks off to be more athletic than these players that have just come in the league and stuff like that. And they should be looking at him and saying, "This is what I need to do to be the best." And it's no surprise that LeBron James has continued to be great this far into his career. And obviously with Anthony Davis, sometimes people underrate Anthony Davis. They kind of say he's kind of the sidekick to LeBron, but Anthony Davis is a very good player. He's a fantastic defender. He can shoot the free ball well, and I think was one of the factors that helped the Lakers overcome the Heat, was the fact that Anthony Davis could stretch the floor and hit those 3-pointers. And obviously, I think the Lakers with Marc Gasol, with Montrezl Harrell, now become even more three-dimensional because they're able to cater their lineup to defend teams and attack teams. They can go big with maybe a Gasol and Davis, or they can go small with Harrell and Davis. So they've got these interchangeable parts. And I think that, for me, more than the kind of, maybe Dennis Schroeder, is the contributing factor to why I think the Lakers will go back at least to the NBA Finals, if not win them.
Yeah, I mean, from my it's nice to lay him down early so people can come back and look at the end of the season and see what he said. I can't see past the Lakers. There was watching the Heat, so prodigious. I watched every single Heat playoff game last season, and not to mention the majority of the regular season. And there was a pace, and there was an energy, and there was a culture. But then when we faced the Lakers, the sheer ferocity, and when I watched Western Conference games, especially, their energy rate, their ferocity, their fire, their speed as well, up and down the court, was just a yard ahead of anything any Eastern team had to offer. Now, I'm looking at the Brooklyn Nets right now. I'm in agreement with you. I fancy the Nets coming, particularly if they can acquire James Harden, who's kind of hopping around at the moment. Is he going to be? He might be going to the Sixers, possibly. Apparently, he has two options. He would prefer the Sixers, or, of course, he'd like to hook back up with Durant, of course, from the Oklahoma City days, which I'm sure a lot of, because I know you're a sort of a slight Oklahoma fan, so I imagine a little part of you is probably going to be feeling quite nostalgic about that idea as well. Ben Simmons is apparently available on the table as a trading piece, but I don't think that removing Ben Simmons from the Sixers makes the Sixers a legitimate contender just with James Harden. I feel like they would need more weapons. I don't actually really think Harden to the Sixers is that plausible. And also, being a Heat fan and having this kind of weird, incestuous rivalry with Philadelphia, I just like seeing them fail, frankly. They really hate us. They hate the fact that we're successful, and we just hate them because they're perennial losers, frankly. But yeah, Ben Simmons going the other way. I feel like Houston's going to very much regress, obviously, with all the trades and the movements that have happened. They were kind of going for, the sort of almost like the Globetrotters kind of touch, weren't they? The greatest show on the court, and it never worked really for me. But yeah, if Harden ends up at the Nets, I mean, they're already a very dangerous outfit. And with him tipping up as well, if they can get the egos right. The only thing that concerns me about the Nets is, of course, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, both have had very high profile injuries in the past. And Kevin Durant is somebody that if he's got to get his body right. If their bodies are right and they can last a season and they can manage their minutes well, which is going to be very important when they're playing, when you're playing the Knicks, for instance, shouldn't be out there for 48 minutes, frankly. But ultimately, I can't see past those two teams when they're firing on all cylinders. I really can't. I think the Heat culture means that you have to kind of discuss the Heat. I'd expect us to kind of push for a top 4 again, and I'd be very happy with that. I know we finished, I think we were 5th last season, and for a 5th seed to end up in the finals is actually quite an achievement. I know a lot of people said, Miami don't deserve to be there and all this nonsense. Well, ultimately, we beat the teams that were in front of us, and we knocked out Giannis's team. It'd be interesting to see how Giannis reacts now he has his money. He's got his big contract. I think it's the all-time highest paid contract, isn't it, for an NBA player? It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it does kind of pile the pressure on, but he's obviously comfortable in Milwaukee. And also, it's not a high media area, is it? It's not like Los Angeles. It's not like Miami. You don't have cameras on you relentlessly. It's a little bit of an easier culture, and it's probably one of the reasons why he opted to stay there. There was some suggestions he might end up at the Heat. I think that was just bluster and ridiculousness, really. Ultimately, our salary cap would never afford that ability and won't do for some time, particularly in the amount of draft picks we've given up to get ourselves into the position we are at the moment. So, yeah, Lakers Nets, it certainly looks that way. I would like to see the Clippers put things together a little bit more. Maybe that 1 year of being able to gel means they're going to be more dangerous. They certainly looked very good at the beginning of things, and ultimately the Clippers as well, their fan base, they thrive on the idea of being number 2 in Los Angeles. So ultimately not having that many fans in the building, if any at all, is probably going to affect the Clippers a lot more than it is the Lakers. We saw the dedication to LeBron, the bubble, everything that comes with that. I just feel that he wants it more than anyone else. That's why Jordan was the best in his era, because he wanted it more than anyone else. He was willing to spit on your grandmother's grave, and he was willing to fucking smash your gran over the head with a steel chair to ensure that he was a champion. And LeBron is very similar in that respect. People say that LeBron's too nice, that he's mentally weak or whatever. I actually don't think that's the case. If anything, he's kind of overcome that and become very much like Jordan in that modern era. But we'll leave the Jordan-LeBron argument for another podcast, because everybody's doing it and it's just so low rent and it's low-hanging fruit in it. But yeah, we'll leave it for there. Both of us have the Lakers and the Nets tentatively coming out of their respective divisions. Alex Lanzo, thank you very much for joining me to discuss NBA, mate.
It's a pleasure.
Hopefully we'll have you back very soon. I look forward to it, and I'm looking forward to getting into this season and, well, getting in the full swing. It's pretty much a full season. I think they've minimized the game slightly, haven't they? It's not a full slate, is it?
I think.
Yeah, it's about 3/4, something along that region. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But nonetheless, great to have the basketball back. Such a quick turnaround for us, at least. So looking forward to it, and it gives us something to watch on Christmas Day. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you did like it, of course, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notifications of all our content going forward, and hopefully you'll get to see Alex's beautiful face a little bit more. And if you're very lucky, he might give you that cheeky 5-finger discount that he's famous for, but you have to ask very nicely for that, I assure you. That's a tentative issue. But for now, we'll catch you very soon for more content from Sly Fox.